Hello and welcome to another Business English Conversation video lesson. I'm George Hoge, half of the Business English Conversation team, and today we're going to continue that discussion I started in the last video about the myth of the educated manager. You'll recall that we were using a Harvard Business Review article that was printed by, written by, what was his name? J. Sterling Livingston, The Myth of the Educated Manager. And the gist of that video, you recall, was that formal education doesn't do the total job in helping educate a manager to be successful. In fact, there's a lot of pitfalls. And we pointed out that there's some things that just don't happen in the formal education programs that can only take place through experience for a manager to be successful. Another add-on to that last video, Mr. Livingstone found that people who change companies frequently, job hoppers if you will, that this is not necessarily a badge of competence, that people don't necessarily change jobs because they're good and they move on to other jobs. Now, granted, that does happen quite frequently, but by and large, what he found was that most people who leave because they have mediocre performance records. In other words, they're not performing up to the standards maybe that they should be. And he also found that those people who continually fail to meet company performance standards are much more likely to leave the company than those who meet the requirements or standards of the job or have strong performances. So what he found, which shouldn't surprise us, is that disappointing performance appraisals is one of the main reasons that people leave or change companies, change employers. Another little tidbit in there. So what is it that managers must learn? Well, one of the important items that managers need to learn is how to solve problems. And you say, oh, but wait, we solved all kinds of problems when we were in business school. That's what they focused on. Well, you're right. Formal management training does focus very heavily on problem solving and decision making. But they don't do a very good job on problem identification, identifying problems and opportunities that a manager should be trying to solve. Formal education tends to overdevelop our analytical skills and underdevelop our ability to take action, to actually solve the problems. Not only the problems, but the right problems. You know, in the classroom, for your entire career, and particularly in the management training programs, the classroom expects respondent behavior. Now this is great for school exams and discussions within the classroom. Respondent behavior, by the way, is nothing more than responding to a response. Okay? You're called upon to issue a response to a question or a statement. And that's what you do when you take a test. The instructor, the teacher, the professor is looking for a particular answer, A, B, C, or D. That's respondent behavior. Well, guess what? In a management situation, it doesn't work very well. Management situation, and the key to being a successful manager, requires operant behavior. Operant behavior, what is that, you say? That's a type of behavior that is modified by the consequences. In other words, you learn how to modify your behavior based on the consequences. You learn how to modify your response to the situation, to the problem, to the opportunity, based on the consequences of what your response might be. And I'm not talking about an A, B, C, or D in the classroom. I'm talking about business profits, people's careers, business opportunities, financial information, operant behavior. In other words, finding problems and opportunities and initiating the action and the follow-through to attain the desired results. That goes beyond the scope of what we learned in management school, way beyond the scope. It boils down to developing, or it's developed by doing what needs to be done. They don't teach you that in management schools. Doing what needs to be done. In other words, the priorities. Getting the must-dos, not the nice-to-dos, or the should-dos, the must-dos for the company, for the people in the company, for the people that work for you, for the results that you're supposed to be achieving. A professor at Harvard Business School had a very great quote, I thought. His name was Harry Livingston, not the same guy that wrote this article, but a different professor. And he said that the greatest difficulty people have in solving problems is the fact that emotion makes it hard for them to see and deal with their problems objectively. Biggest problem we have is dealing with our emotions when it comes to solving problems. Think about that one. I know I've been guilty of that. Everybody's guilty of that. They don't teach you how to deal with that in management schools, do they? Rarely do managers learn in formal education how to maintain an appropriate psychological distance from their problems so that their judgments, are not clouded by their emotions. That's a tough one. Example, how about if you came up through the ranks in the business with 2 or 3 people that were your peers for a long time. Then all of a sudden one day you became the manager and those peers worked for you. And then it comes to that point in time where you've got to sit down and do an appraisal with those former peers. And lo and behold, one of them is not doing very well. So this is not only a former peer, but probably a friend who maybe you went out to dinner with. Maybe you even know the family, or he or she knows your family. And you've got to sit down and tell them they're not performing up to the standards that are required. Now, how do you separate those emotions? Tough to do. And I'll tell you what, they don't teach you that in school. But it has to be done. So as a consequence, managers suffer their worst trauma in business when they discover that the rational solutions to problems are not always enough. They've got to somehow or other cope with the human emotions to get the results. They've got to cope with their own emotions. They've got to cope with the emotions that they know or expect might come from the people that work for them. Key stuff. Next video, we're going to continue talking about this idea, the myth of the educated manager, and we're going to move on to some other areas that only through experience can you learn. So until then, it's George Hoge signing off.